Hi, I'm Ann Parker. I'm a past national president. I'm going to be talking to you tonight about our financial policies. Blue Star Mothers of America is a 501c3 corporation, and as such, your chapter will be in accordance with the Internal Revenue Code. Your chapter may have some standing rules with regard to certain matters, but nothing in your standing rules can be in conflict with the national financial policies. We'll start with 1.0. The national president will appoint a finance committee according to the bylaws. The committee will be approved by the National Executive Board. The convention body will set the annual budget for how the funds are to be spent during our fiscal year. If anything is not covered in the budget, it must be approved by, in the case of the national organization, the executive board. In your chapter, if anything is not in the budget, you have established membership. You may do email voting when a financial emergency arises requiring expenditure, but that expenditure shall not exceed $500. And you must have a quorum of approval votes, and at your next meeting, that action will be ratified. Financial reports are to be submitted to the general membership no less than quarterly for all levels of the organization. I would ask you on the chapter level to try to be more diligent to do monthly reports, and that those monthly reports are sent to all members via email, even those that are not at the meeting, as should your minutes be. It is important for those financial reports to not just show figures, but to show exactly how much money came in, the sources of that money, and how money was spent, and how that was categorized in your expenditures. We ask that you have a bank account that is FDIC or NCUA, meaning Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation or National Credit Union accreditation. Would ask that you choose a bank that you may do online banking, that you has bill pay, and as a bonus, if you can get online deposit, that's always good. Every check requires two signatures. The primary signatures are the treasurer and the financial secretary. All chapters must contain the chapter state and number on the body of the check. The first vice president will be added to the account for emergency purposes only. So remember, your two primary officers to sign checks are your treasurer and your financial secretary, and that the vice president will be a signer only in case of an emergency. Your president will never sign a check. What your president will do in this regard is sign a bank signer's verification letter verifying the signatures on the bank account to be accurate in accordance with our governing documents. In case during the year you must change financial officers, and a new bank signer's verification form must be completed. You must go back to the bank and get that change made, and you must file a new officer roster. All of these are online activities. Repetitive payments to the same vendor are most easily done through bill pay, but you may ask, how are two signatures available on bill pay? Once the treasurer has received approval to pay a bill, in the case of the chapter, it would be voted on by the membership and included in the minutes. The chapter treasurer will send a notification to the chapter financial secretary that she's initiating a bill pay. Financial secretary will write back to her that she's aware of this and approves the bill pay being initiated. Your treasurer will file with the copy of the invoice that's to be paid this communication with your treasurer and financial secretary. All deposits are to be properly received, deposited, recorded, reconciled, and kept under adequate security. And this must be done by the financial secretary. The treasurer writes the checks, The financial secretary takes care of deposits, and those jobs should never commingle. Fixed assets are covered in 1.6, talks about depreciation. We use a straight line method with a useful life of anywhere from 3 to 10 years. If you have questions in this regard, our National Financial Secretary would be glad to help you. Now, the annual budget is approved, as we said, by the membership, and it is the authority that we use for paying bills. So if you have a budget line item, for example, your post office box, the post office box rent becomes due, you have adequate funds to do so, your treasurer and your financial secretary will institute the proper documentation, whether it's bill pay or a check, to pay that particular expenditure. If it is not in the budget, then it must be taken to the membership, recorded in the minutes for that expenditure to be taken care of by your financial officers. No check may be paid to cash. When cash is required for a fundraising event, a check may be issued to a member designated to obtain the startup funds. Once the event is finished, those startup funds are recorded in a separate deposit going back to the bank. 1.8 talks about the treasurer is the one to initiate paying a bill. She'll keep a copy of the invoice, the receipt, and that will be the record that will occur for that transaction to be paid, whether it's said by bill pay or check, and then your financial secretary will sign that check and send it on its way to the proper payee. Your financial secretary and your treasurer will reconcile the accounts together each month. As you can tell by this, no one person does all the financial accounting for a chapter. It is a joint effort between the two financial officers. 1.10 talks about the chapter name. It is established in your charter and cannot be changed. 1.11 talks about a P.O. box. Every chapter is required to have a permanent address, non-residential, to receive your mail. We think the best practice is for your chapter to get a P.O. box, and that is a justifiable expense and should be a permanent part of each chapter's budget. There are a few chapters that do use a permanent address of another VSO, and that is acceptable, but it is not as convenient as going to your own post office box. 1.11.2 talks about changing your address. If you need to change that P.O. box, there are 4 steps. You put in a forwarding address with the U.S. Post Office. You update the chapter profile using the information form on the website. You update the EIN submission form on the website. And last but not least, you notify the IRS using Form 8822B and any respective state agencies with your chapter is registered. 1.12 talks about uncashed checks. There is a specific procedure to be followed, and there's a time that if the check is not cashed after you follow the steps outlined, then those funds can be returned to your treasury. 1.13 talks about non-sufficient funds checks. If you get one of those, do not accept another check to pay it. You'll need certified funds like a money order or a cashier's check, but in no circumstances are you to take a second check to replace the one that did not go through. 1.14 talks about accounting and financial records. Whatever method your chapter uses to record your finances, whether it's Quicken, QuickBooks, an Excel spreadsheet, make sure that there is a secondary backup. It's on a memory stick. It's held by a separate person. There's no one person should have all the records of the chapter at any time without a backup. At the end of the fiscal year, all finance records are to be stored with the recording secretary in a chapter email. 1.14.3 talks about all financial records must be surrendered by the outgoing officers to the incoming officers. 1.14.4 talks about the logo usage. Now, upon approval of the national president, the 25% net proceeds from the chapter, the department, or the auxiliary permitted logo usage sales that has to be approved by the national president, as we said, and then upon 25% of the net proceeds are sent to the National Financial Secretary at least annually by August 15th with a report giving all the details. Now, let's talk about how that is calculated. You pay $10 for a shirt, you sell it for $20, that gives you a $10 profit. You would remit $2.50 or 25% of the $10 profit. Remember, this is on fundraising items. There are certain other items that are covered in the bylaws that you do not need permission. But if this is a fundraising item, you get national president approval to use that logo, then that's the procedure for transmitting the money back to the financial secretary. Now let's talk about 2.0 accounting policies. The National Finance Committee will prepare an annual budget. It will be presented to the National Executive Board for their approval, and then it will be submitted to the membership 60 days before convention. It is presented to the convention body for their approval. On the chapter level, you should be preparing a budget and have it approved by September of each year. 2.2 talks about general financial accounting. The IRS recognizes 3 categories. Programs, those are funds used to promote the organization in ceremonies, brochures, newsletters, VA voluntary services, and volunteer activities. Management funds are used to maintain the organization, such as bookkeeping, phone, meetings, and oversight. And fundraising, it is anything used to raise money for the organization. 2.21 talks about we use an accrual method of accounting. So we record the checks and the deposits the day they're made, and the expenses, regardless of when that check is cashed, it is recorded on the day it is written. 2.3 talks about restricted and unrestricted funds. A donor may donate to you and write on that check, send you a personal letter attached to the check, or even a Post-it note, and tell you that those funds are to be used for a specific item like care packages. If you cannot use it for that purpose, you may go back to the donor and ask them to unrestrict the funds, but that is their prerogative. And unless the donor unrestricts the fund, you must use them for the purpose intended, regardless if it takes you a little while to get that activity going. But you may not take the funds and restrict them by the chapter or any officers of the chapter. Only the donor may do so. 2.4 talks about chapter grants. Each year we give to new chapters an automatic $250 grant. They just have to submit the paperwork. That's to help them get started. More established chapters can submit a chapter grant to aid them in working our mission. They may apply for it in the same fashion, but they'll need to talk about what they're going to do with the funds. No chapter grant can be submitted for an activity already completed. 3.0 talks about the debit card. No chapter is to have a credit card. Only the treasurer and the financial secretary are to hold those cards. Even though the vice president is a signature, she does not have a debit card, and that debit card is not to be loaned out to anyone to use other than the 2 officers. Approved travel, 3.13 talks about the debit card on the national level can be used for official travel, accommodations, convention-related expenses, flowers, and other business purchases like ink and paper, etc. This holds true on the chapter level as well. Airline and hotel reservations, this will likely affect the chapter only at convention time, but on prior approval, if it's in your budget and your officers are going to be going to national convention requiring airline reservations and hotel reservations, then that may be done by the debit card. Once it is approved, buy the membership and you have money in the bank and have the money budgeted. You may not submit a receipt for a rental car. 3.16 talks about transparency on the debit card. Can be on the national level used on one of the things it can be used for is restocking the store, yearbooks, deposits, or other approved expenses. On the national level, 3.17 talks about things that the debit card can be used for. 3.18 talks about refunds. So there's a 30-day refund policy on purchases made with the store and on membership dues that must be asked for within the 30 days of processing the funds. 3.19 talks about good standing. A department, a chapter, or an auxiliary must be in good standing to receive any funds from national, such as due to chapter, department, or auxiliary checks for membership. 1/2 of your $30 membership dues will be coming back to your chapter a month after the quarter closes. So our fiscal year begins in September and ends in August. So the first quarter would be September, October, November, and those checks should be coming out in December. 3.2 talks about reimbursement of national officers, and we do ask on the chapter and the national and department level that all reimbursements be submitted within 60 days of incurring those expenses. 3.21 through 3.26 talks about various expenses on the national level. We're going to stick to the chapter tonight. 3.3 talks about things that could be approved. We've never had any salaried employees. We've never rented any space on the national level. So those would require National Executive Board approval, office furnishings, and other travel that still all must be approved by the National Board since it's outside of our budget. Things that are not authorized on any level: travel meals, internet, convention meal tickets, unless the meal are included in the convention agenda as part of the registration, travel insurance, advanced booking, cabin upgrade or seat selection fees, or hotel amenities. Now let's talk about getting reimbursement for using your private vehicle. You have two options. One is 14 cents per mile, which is the charitable rate, and the second is called the actual cost of operating the vehicle. So to do that, you're going to need to follow a particular pattern. You must show the beginning and the ending odometer reading on your vehicle. You must have fuel receipts. You can't include anything like general repairs, depreciations. You must have the make and model of the vehicle used, and you must use a route map showing where you went from and where you went to. And then you may get actual expenses for the fuel. We've talked about the 60-day reimbursement. Now, 3.53 talks about air travel. If you're traveling by commercial transportation, reimbursement is not to exceed the amount that it would have been paid via a common carrier with 21 days advance notice. Reimbursement, as we said, should not include advanced boarding, cabin upgrades, seat selection, or anything in excess of the base fare. National Convention is covered in 4.0. The site is picked by the national president, as is the hotel. The national president at convention will receive travel and lodging for 6 nights and complimentary National Convention registration fee, as do members of the National Executive Board. The national president is allowed 2 complimentary guest lunches and banquet tickets. And then we talk about the people that are on the executive board, meaning the 3 most recent past national presidents, the national elected officers, the national parliamentarian, the National Governing Documents Committee Chair during a governing documents year, the National Finance Committee Chair, the National Convention Chair, and the National Chaplain. All shall receive travel and lodging based on 2 per room for 6 nights and a complimentary registration. If 4.15 talks about if we have a speaker at our banquet or our luncheon, they may bring a guest, one guest, but if they want to bring other guests, that would be at their own cost. 4.16 says we'll maintain a store at convention to sell our merchandise that's on the online store. If chapters wish to sell merchandise they have, they'll pay a $25 vendor fee, and outside vendors will pay a $50 vendor fee. The Gavel Club, which is an auxiliary made up of past national presidents, will be able to have a vendor table, as will the National Big Dipper, at no cost. The National Treasurer can be reimbursed for fuel, parking, and tolls, overnight lodging if she is bringing the store to the convention. If it's too far, she'll just have to mail it, and that would not be applicable. We have a silent auction at convention, and that amount that's raised in the prior year goes to the next year's convention. Chapters may reimburse on behalf of their convention delegates any or all of the above, depending on their budget and approval of their membership. Convention registration fees, convention offered meals for delegates only, meaning those that are included in the convention registration, association travel fees to and from convention location, lodging 2 persons per room, not to exceed 6 nights. We talk about other things that are approved on the national level, wreaths that we buy for Memorial Day and Veterans Day. And then we talk about the national president and an appropriate appointed officer she chooses are able to go to Gold Star Mothers Weekend, American Gold Star Mothers National Convention. On Veterans Day and Memorial Day, we have the president, historic, patriotic instructor, and DC representative that are there, take care of things. And then the president will receive travel and 3 nights lodging to a department convention if it's not provided by the respective department. We talk about the National Executive Board mid-year meeting and what's covered there, and special events that may come from time to time. 4.5 talks about games of chance. If your chapter, department, or auxiliary is wanting to have a game of chance, please make sure that you have it in conjunction with knowing what your state requires before you have the event. Know what must be filled out. Some states have many regulations, some states have very few. Now we'll talk about 5.0. As I said, there are 2 auxiliaries. One, the national presidents, past national presidents, called the Gavel Club, and one is the Big Dipper that provides educational assistance fund. And every auxiliary, chapter, and department once a year provides the national organization with a series of compliance documents that are on our national website, and a report of the chapter activities and a detailed financial statement are part of that. And our auxiliaries are asked to do the same thing, to present at the national convention a report of their activities and a detailed financial statement. 6.0 covers donations. Convention delegates may approve a donation of $1,500 or up to 45% of the annual income to 501c3 organizations supporting our mission. If there are funds available, $1,500 or up to 45% of the annual net income is to be allocated, as I said, between 3 different 501c3s that are voted on by the National Convention body. 6.2 talks about the National VAVS Fund. Each chapter is to donate $45 each year during compliance, but the national organization, if funds are available, may match that up to 100%. 6.3 talks about the women in military service. We give them a donation each year, twice a year at Veterans Day and Memorial Day in lieu of a wreath. 7.0 talks about fees and assessments. Membership shall be set at $30 per fiscal year. If a member joins after June 1st of any given year, their payment will be credited to the upcoming fiscal year. The VAVS fund is $45 a year. You'll pay that during the time that you file compliance, which basically is September 1 to December 15th. And new and chartering chapters will submit a charter fee of $25, which you had done as a part of a new chartering of either a department, an auxiliary, or a department. And that's the completion of that. If you have any questions, please feel free to email me. Thank you.